From colonies to cliques, why English rules the world. This is a lesson for intermediate level ESL learners. It's designed to enhance listening and reading comprehension. Here's the agenda for the lesson. First, we're going to review vocabulary. I will review here with you, or you can find the flashcards attached in the description. Then we're going to read the text. I'll read the text and provide some context. The text is also attached. You can read it on your own or read it as a class. And finally, we're going to do some comprehension questions. There's a quiz attached below. Feel free to do that quiz on your own. Before we read the article, let's review some key vocabulary terms that are going to appear while we're reading. The first term that's going to appear is international language. And that's what English has become, the world's international language. An international language is a language used by people from different countries to communicate. The next word is expansion. And we're going to talk about how English expanded to all parts of the globe. Expansion is the act of spreading or growing into new areas. The next term is colonization, and that's originally how the language expanded. And there we see a cartoon of Cecil Rhodes, who was a famous colonizer, and he wanted to conquer all of Africa and put it under the British Empire. Now, colonization is the process of establishing control over foreign territories. And Cecil Rhodes and others were colonizers, and they colonized for the British Empire. They expanded British control over the world at one point in history. Now, the British Empire was the group of countries and territories controlled by Britain from the 17th to 20th century. And all of this territory in red was once controlled by the British Empire, over 1/3 of the world's landmass, and they had the world's largest empire in all of history. And that's a big part of why English has spread. Now, originally, the British colonized different parts of the world, and they sent people from England, Scotland, and Ireland to other parts of the world. And these were native English speakers, but when they traveled to different parts of the world, they developed different varieties of English. A variety is a different form or version of something, like a language, for example. And there are many varieties of English, like British English, American English, Australian English. Not the dialect did not remain the same throughout history. As people spread to different parts of the globe, they developed different ways of speaking. Once the British Empire subsided, the United States became the dominant world power. At one point, it became 50% of the world economy after World War II. So the United States was the dominant economic power. It had most of the money in the world, and that's how English continued to expand. Economic power is a country's ability to influence global markets and trade due to its economic strength. Economic power, along with military power and cultural influence, they've all also helped the English language expand. English-speaking countries have historically had quite a bit of influence. And influence is the power to affect or change how things happen or are done. And one way that the English-speaking world influences the rest of the world is through internet content. The British and Americans kind of debate over who invented the internet. But regardless, the majority of the world's internet content is in English. And that's one way that the English-speaking world has influenced the rest of the world. Now, internet content is the information or material available on the internet, just like what you're watching right now. Now, as English has expanded, the non-native speakers now outnumber the native speakers. Native speakers are people who were born speaking English. It's our mother tongue. It's the language our parents spoke to us. It's the language we grew up with. And non-native speakers are going to be people who learned the language in school or in other places outside of their home. So native speakers would be people who speak a language as their first language from birth. And there are more non-native speakers of English than there are native speakers today. That's how much the language has expanded. And it's also the official language of many countries. And an official language is a language used by a government or organization for official purposes. Now let's read the article. Today, English is used as the world's international language. This happened because of two main reasons. The first reason is the expansion of the British Empire from the 17th to 19th century. The second reason is the rise of the United States as the world economic power in the 20th century. Let's look at the first reason, the expansion of the British Empire. This had two main phases. The first phase started in the 17th century when many English-speaking people from England, Scotland, and Ireland moved to places like North America, Australia, and New Zealand. The English they spoke slowly changed and developed into different varieties of English, like American English and Australian English. These varieties have differences, mainly in pronunciation, but also some vocabulary and grammar. So English started right here in England, at the bottom of this island, which is Britain, and at the north of the island, you have Scotland, and over here to the west, Wales, and you also have Ireland, which is a small island next to it. And it didn't take long for the English to conquer Scotland and Ireland. And once they secured all of the British Isles, they decided to expand out even further. Now, originally, in order to expand their empire, the English sent native English speakers to other parts of the world. Their first colonial experiment was right here where I'm from, on the east of what today is referred to as the United States. These were the 13 colonies right here on the Atlantic seaboard. And eventually the United States declared independence, but that didn't stop the British from continuing to spread their empire. They colonized modern-day Canada, modern-day Australia, and also New Zealand. And these, along with some others, are what are referred to as settler colonies. They're settler colonies because English-speaking settlers went to these areas of the world to develop colonies, which would be a part of the British Empire. Now, the British didn't stop there. They continued to expand. The settler colonies had native populations, non-English speakers, but there really weren't that many. The populations weren't too large in these areas of the world, which is why the British went there first to expand. But after creating the settler colonies, the British decided to go on to the second phase of colonization, where they moved into these parts in light blue. These parts of the world had large populations like India, Nigeria, and many others. There were already many people there speaking languages other than English. The second phase happened during the 18th and 19th centuries when Britain created colonies in Africa and Asia. This colonization led to the development of many new varieties of English called New Englishes, like Indian, Singaporean, Malaysian, Hong Kong, Nigerian, and South African English. So here we see a very famous political cartoon which does a good job of explaining that time in history. This is a political cartoon showing British imperialism as an octopus with its tentacles spreading across different countries, representing the empire's control and influence during the 19th and early 20th centuries. And the British really did have a lot of influence worldwide through their empire, and they spread into parts of the world that had large populations. Now, after a long period of British colonialism, places like India started to speak English. And many of these parts of the world still use English as an official language. And they developed their own style of speaking, just like the settler colonies. They've got their own unique way of speaking English, and these are what are referred to as New Englishes. The British Empire helped spread English around the world, but English became even more important when the United States became a major power in the 20th century. After World War II, the US made up about 50% of the world economy. Today, the US makes up about 25% of the world economy, but still has a huge influence. This is clear in many ways. English is the official language of important groups like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. Most of the top 100 movies are in English, and about 55 to 60% of internet content is in English. English is also the main language for science, with about 80% of scientific journals published in English. Now, after the Second World War, the British Empire, for the most part, fell apart. It dissipated. There's no more British Empire. There still kind of is. It has its remnants, but for the most part, it doesn't exist any longer. And after that Second World War, the United States picked up where the British left off. Not so much in colonization, but very much in influencing the world. After the Second World War, the United States made up 50% of the world economy, about 50%, which is half of the world's money. That's a very big deal. Since then, it's no longer 50%. Today, it might make up 25% of the world economy. That's probably a high estimate, but that's still a lot. That's a lot of money. And therefore, speaking English offers a lot of economic opportunity. Also, through entertainment, internet content, and scientific journals, as well as other things, English continues to spread. Because of its global role, English is now taught as a second or foreign language in most countries. It is estimated that about 1.5 billion people speak English worldwide, with 370 to 400 million native speakers and about 1.1 to 1.5 billion non-native speakers, meaning non-native speakers outnumber native speakers by a ratio of about 3 to 1. Learning English offers many benefits. It helps with global communication, job opportunities, travel, education, and enjoying entertainment. So English has spread so much that the non-native speakers now far outnumber the native speakers. There are at most 400 million people like me who are native speakers, and there are easily over a billion non-native speakers, or that's people who speak English fluently but also speak a second language as well. And if trends continue, that number is only going to grow. This is as of 2023. In 10 to 20 years from now, if trends continue, the non-native speakers are going to outnumber the native speakers by an even wider margin. And although the way English spread isn't always the most pleasant, it doesn't have the prettiest history, imperialism, war, economic influence, things like that. But I would argue that it is a very nice thing that an international language has developed. It really helps the people of the world with things like global communication, trade, economic opportunities, travel, education, entertainment. I think it's a wonderful thing that we're all coming to a point where we can communicate with one another. And now the fun part. Let's answer some comprehension questions and see exactly what you understood. Number one, true or false? English became an international language mainly because of the British Empire's expansion and the United States' economic influence. What do you think? Is that true or false? If you said true, you'd be correct. English became an international language because of the British Empire spreading it to many places, and later the United States becoming an important economic power. Number two, true or false? The British Empire's expansion only influenced English in North America. If you answered false, you'd be correct. The British Empire's expansion influenced English in many places, not just North America. They came to North America first, but later expanded to many parts of the globe, over 1/3 of the world's landmass. It was the largest empire in world history. Number three, true or false? Today, the United States makes up around 25% of the world economy. If you said true, you'd be correct. After World War II, the United States had a big part of the world's economy. It was originally almost half immediately after the war, but today it's about 25%, if that. That might be a high estimate, but something around that number. Number four, true or false? Today, there are more native English speakers than non-native speakers. If you said false, you'd be correct. There are more people who speak English as a second language than those who speak it as their first language. Actually, almost 3 times as many people who speak English as a second language as opposed to their first language. And that number is only getting larger. Okay, now let's do some fill in the blanks. The British Empire expanded from the 17th to 19th century, creating what in different parts of the world? What did the British Empire create in different parts of the world? Is it A, colonies, B, countries, C, wars, or D, governments? Now, all of these are technically true, but one answer is better than the others and relates to the article that I read. If you said A, colonies, you'd be correct. The British Empire created colonies in different parts of the world, which helped spread English. Of course, those colonies eventually became countries. They certainly created a lot of wars, and they also created governments. So all of those answers are technically correct, but colonies would be the best answer. Number six, let's fill in the blank. English became more important when the United States became a world what power in the 20th century? How can we fill in that blank? Would it be a technological power, a cultural power, an economic power, or a colonial power? Now, three of these are technically true, but one is the best answer. If you said C, economic power, you'd be correct. English became more important when the United States became a world economic power in the 20th century. English became more important when the United States became a powerful economic power or a large portion of the world's economy. It controls a lot of the world's money. Number 7, fill in the blank. English is the what of many international organizations, including the United Nations. Is English the native language of many international organizations, the official language, the international language, or the variety of many international organizations? If you said B, official language, you would be correct. English is the official language of many international organizations, including the United Nations and many others. They speak English because they were originally established, for the most part, by the United States after the Second World War. Of course, other countries played a part in establishing them as well. Okay, last fill in the blank. Today, about 60% of what is in English? 60% of economic power, 60% of scientific journals, 60% of official languages, or 60% of internet content? If you said D, internet content, you'd be correct. Today, about 60% of internet content is in English, or up to that amount. That's a lot. That's over half of the internet is in English, and that is a big deal. Number 9, multiple choice. What happened during the first phase of British Empire expansion? A, English-speaking people moved to Africa and Asia. B, English-speaking people moved to North America, Australia, and New Zealand. C, English-speaking people moved to South America and the Middle East. Or D, English-speaking people moved to the Caribbean and Central America. If you said B, you'd be correct. English-speaking people moved to North America, Australia, and New Zealand. That's why I speak English today, coming from the United States. These settler colonies, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, were a part of the first phase of the British Empire. During the first phase of the British Empire, English-speaking people moved to these places, which changed the way English was spoken there. And we've all developed our own varieties. There's American English, Australian English, Canadian English, so forth and so on. So that leads to the next question. What is a variety of English? Is it A, type of English with different pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar? B, a stage in the British Empire's expansion? C, an official language of an organization? Or D, a process of creating new colonies? If you said a type of English with different pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar, you'd be correct. A variety of English means a different form of English with its own way of speaking and writing. Now, there are only two standard forms of writing of English. That's British Standard English and American Standard English. But there are many different ways that it's spoken. There are so many different types of pronunciation. And there isn't one correct way to do it. In fact, the language is constantly developing, it's constantly changing. If anyone ever tells you that this is the way it must be pronounced, that's not true. In fact, you'll find that people pronounce words very differently from place to place, and that's always going to be the case as the language expands. No two groups are going to speak it in the exact same way, and no one way is superior to the other, despite what some people like to think. Number 11, how many non-native English speakers are estimated to be there in the world? Would it be 1.1 million, 370 to 400 million, 1.1 billion, or 8 billion? Now, these are non-native speakers. If you said 1.1 billion, you are correct, and that's actually a conservative estimate. There are about 1.1 billion people who speak English as a second language around the world, and the number may be even higher, and it's only growing. So you are not alone if you're speaking English as a second language. Final question. Which of the following is not, I repeat, is not mentioned as a benefit of learning English? Which is not a benefit? A, travel. B, job opportunities. C, cooking skills. Or D, global communication. If you said C, cooking skills, you'd be correct. Now, maybe you can read recipes in English, and that can help you with your cooking skills, but that um, is not one of the ways that was mentioned in the passage. The quiz talks about the benefits, or the article talks about the benefits like travel, job opportunities, but cooking skills are not mentioned. Although you could possibly use English to help with cooking as well. All right, we're finished. That's it. I hope you had fun. And I hope I offered some insight on how English spread as the world's international language. It may not have always been pretty, and most of history is not, if you go deep into it. But having an international language can really help the world, and it offers some perspective on how the language spread. So I hope you had fun, and I'll see you next time for another fun and engaging lesson.